Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to the Communities Committee. Number one, do we have any apologies today, please, or substitutes?
Yes, Convener, we've got apologies from Councillors MacDonald and Councillor Sturrock, and substituting today is Councillor Whiteside and Councillor.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I do declarations of interest, we've had a deputation request relevant to item number 4, which is the application for road construction consent, and that deputation is by a Mr. Neil Cool. Can I ask the committee to agree that Mr. Cool be allowed to speak?
Agreed.
Now move to the declarations of interest, in case anybody wants to take that information into consideration as part of their declaration of interest. Councillor Whiteside.
Thank you, Convener. It's not a notice of interest, it is a notice of a possible amendment to item 4, please.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any declarations of interest to note? No. Okay, if we move on to item 3, which is minutes of the last meeting. Is everybody happy with these?
Yep.
Okay, brilliant. If we move on now to hear from Mr. Cool. Now, let me just double check this. My apologies. Can I just get Fiona to keep me right here?
Yeah, I think
it's Mr. Todd, isn't it?
Yes, there's Mr.
Todd.
And
yeah, sorry. So just explain the process. We're going to hear from the applicant's agent or the applicant, Mr. Todd, and then I'm going to hear from Mr. Cool, and then I'm going to allow Mr. Todd to sum up. So if we go first of all to Mr. Todd, please. You're on mute, Mr. Todd. There you go.
Yeah, sorry, good afternoon. I'm actually the property consultant for the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, convener and members. These recommended for approval applications are simply to provide proper access to the owner's adjacent land, rights which incidentally are referred to in the Meadowbank householders' title deeds. And these applications would fully implement the council's original road adoption schedule of the mid-1990s, but now in accordance with the Roads Department's current technical requirements. Should there be any questions, either myself or Zane will try to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. That's all you want to say at the moment. That's great. Thank you. So I think if we move now to Mr. Cool. Mr. Cool with us?
I think Mr. Cool should be in the meeting.
Hi, Mr. Cool, are you with us? Ah, there he is.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Mr. Cool. Yeah, you went back on mute. Yeah, you're still on mute.
Unmute.
Okay, thank you. You have 10 minutes and
okay.
Questions afterwards.
Okay,
so once again, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Convener, for giving me the opportunity to speak to the committee today. Just for the record, my name is Neil Cool, and for the last 27 years I've lived in Meadowbank Gardens Wellbank, which is one of the streets affected by this proposal. You'll have read already written objections from me and from a number of residents of both Meadowbank Gardens and Meadowbank View, and I'd like to just take 5 minutes of your time to highlight our very real concerns about these proposals. I'd also at the same time like to refer you to the photos which were kindly circulated by Fiona to the committee members, And I hope that these will give you a good visual picture of the area which is affected by this application. The first point I'd like to make is that, in my view, the application appears misleading. The CC3 which residents received says the application is to extend the footpaths at the end of the existing roads. There are no footpaths, and we're now led to believe that the application is actually for vehicle access for agricultural purposes. In my view, it's really not credible that a landowner would need to or even want to drive agricultural vehicles through a residential area to reach a field. It's beyond belief, in my view. And the reason it's not credible, again, in my view, is that there are already access points to the field which have been used by agricultural vehicles for the last 27 years. And I'd like to refer you to photos reference numbers 1 to 3, which show the access road currently used, as well as 2 other potential access points to the same area. And so we question, therefore, why a landowner would now need not 1, but 2 additional access points, which are only 75 metres apart, to a field through a residential area. The 2 access points are coincidentally exactly the same as those identified in a previous 2005 planning application from Glenlathan Developments for a housing development in the same field, which was refused by Angus Council. We see that Tulloch Homes are identified in the CC2 as an interested party, and that would lead us to suspect that the true aim of the application is not about agricultural access, but it's to open up the land for a housing development. And as the previous housing development application was refused, we question why a similar application would now be approved. Whatever the true reason for the application is, we believe that the roads in question are not suitable for additional traffic of any kind, and especially not agricultural traffic. Any additional agricultural traffic would have to come into the Meadowbank area from the main Kellis Road via Giggy Bank, which is a residential street with a number of sharp road junctions, as shown in photos numbers 4 and 5. You'll also see from photos numbers 6 and 7 that there are several points in the Meadowbank streets, 4 in total, where the roads narrow to a width of no more than 3 metres, which is barely enough room for a car to pass, and which already makes access difficult for large vehicles. You'll see that photos numbers 8 and 9, that there are usually a large number of residents and visitor vehicles in the area, resulting often in parking on pavements, which narrows the streets even more. In addition to that, we're very concerned about the impact additional agricultural traffic might have on safety, health and mental health of residents. Increased agricultural traffic would be a safety concern for children walking or cycling to school, as well as for elderly and disabled residents. You will have read the written objection from Wendy Duncan, a resident of Meadowbank View, who has some real concerns about the impact of the application on her disabled son and family life. If we remove the 2 cul-de-sacs at the end of the streets, you would reduce safe turning points as well as areas for overflow parking. Noise and air pollution would increase, road surfaces would be further degraded, and property values could well be negatively impacted. So, in summary then, in my view, the application, I believe, is deliberately misleading, it's completely unnecessary, and it's not appropriate for this area. And we would ask that the committee refuses the application today. That's all I have to say. Thank you for allowing me to express my comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kuhl. Can I now ask if there are any questions to Mr. Kuhl from any colleagues? Councillor Fotheringham.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, thank you, Mr. Kuhl, for your very detailed presentation there. I'm kind of familiar with the area, but there's obviously current access there, and you're saying that there's actually no footpaths proposed in the new sort of extension to the bit. So, in your opinion, do you feel that the current accesses are absolutely sufficient for what the for access to these fields?
They are, as I've said, I've lived here for 27 years and the field has been used during that time. Normally there are animals grazing there and they're brought in, feeding stations are brought in by tractors. So the land is fully accessible at the moment for agricultural purposes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fotheringham. Councillor Whiteside.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks, Mr. Cool, for your presentation. You articulated very well the questions that this paper throws up, and I was just wondering if you know of any of your neighbours who are actually in favour of the proposals.
I do not. I think I've spoken to most of the residents of Meadowbank Gardens and View. Not everyone has put in an objection, but anyone I've spoken to is against this proposal.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Speed. I think you're still on mute, Councillor Speed.
Sorry, Councillor Salmond.
That's okay, there you go.
That's me off now. Thank you, Mr. Cool. You kind of highlighted kind of the impact in terms of traffic movement and the types of vehicles that may be then coming into the neighbourhood and the impact that would have. But you also touched on kind of pavement parking and the impact on kind of pedestrian travel. I just wondered if you could highlight that impact a bit more as to, you know, how you foresee that kind of impacting on residents that may wish to use active travel to get around.
Well, I think, you know, that there are a number of families in the streets who have 3 or 4 vehicles, cars, and if you add to that delivery vehicles, large vehicles coming in to empty bins, deliver oil or whatever, it is already a very congested street in my view, and any additional traffic, particularly agricultural, would be very, very difficult to support.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else got any further questions? Anybody that's not spoken? No. Okay, I'm going to ask Mr. Todd or Zain, I think is his colleague, if they wish to answer any of these questions that have been raised and then finally give a summing up.
Yeah, make another point. In terms of, obviously from a technical point of the queries that's regarding the road, the degrading of the road and the narrowing of the road. In terms of degrading, with the vehicle that's been talked about as potentially taking access to the field, which won't be a large agricultural vehicle, because as you've said, there is a pinch point on the road. So therefore, the smaller vehicles that a farmer might use won't in fact degrade the road. It is only large vehicles that have impacts on the road construction. That's probably it for myself in terms of the technical aspect.
Okay, would you like to say anything further before we complete this section?
Convener, if I could just say that these RCCs are not suitable for accessing a housing development, but in any event, the land's not allocated in the local plan for housing. As Zain said, these would be for light vehicles only to land which is pasture, and will make for more efficient management when visiting rather than having to come through other adjoining fields. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we've completed that section. So if we now move on to agenda item number 4, which is the actual application for road construction consent, and I'm going to ask Walter Scott to introduce this report, please.
Thank you. In terms of the report, it's 4622, page 9 of the papers. I'd like to highlight the nature of the report in that it's been referred to committee as we've received representations, and therefore as such the Director of Infrastructure is no longer delegated the authority to grant consent or to refuse the application. In respect of those representations, the committee is asked through the recommendations to consider those representations and to agree where those representations haven't come from those directly notified and within the usual 28-day time frame to consider those. And then ultimately, having considered those representations and no doubt the presentations made, to agree to grant the consent at Meadowbank Gardens and Meadowbank View, as they both meet the required technical standards, subject to the conditions that are attached to the report.
Okay, so us. Okay, can I open up then for questions? Councillor Speed. I think you're still on mute, Councillor Speed, sorry.
Sorry, it's jumping today, Councillor Salmond.
Don't worry about it.
I do have concerns around the impact on this community, in particular with those that may require direct access to their home, who may have vehicles that they use, mobility vehicles, as Mr. Cool had kind of picked up on. And also just in terms of pedestrian movement and pedestrian safety. You know, we can.
For Speed, we're on questions. You have a question?
Yeah, so I'm just building up to my question. We can see on some of the pictures that there is, you know, quite a number of vehicles parked on the pavement quite close together on one particular stretch. There doesn't seem to be kind of, I don't notice any kind of drop curbs and things. So, you know, often when pedestrians are faced with barriers like that, they have to travel on the road. I just wondered, you know, how we can foresee we're going to still promote active travel and health and wellbeing opportunities if in this area it becomes, you know, more difficult for people to get around safely on foot or by wheel, scooting around. Mr.
Scott, would you like to address that, please?
Yeah, sure. As noted in the report, Councillor Speed, in 417 and 418, I reiterate that technically the crossings meet the technical standards. The issues that are raised are considered to be reasonable in that respect, as discussed, and there would be avenues and actions to be taken elsewhere with the powers that the authority would have for the likes of pavement parking, limited though that is at the moment, but may change in the foreseeable future. But ultimately, all those issues from an officer perspective in considering the technical issues, we do not feel that the application meets the technical standards. It is then for the committee and the councillors to determine the impact of the other issues that are being raised in making a decision.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fotheringham, please.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Yes, we've heard Mr. Scott speaking about the technical standards, and it's in the report several times about the technical standards. Can I ask what the technical standards are, what they mean, because I'm a layperson in terms of this? And can I also ask, Convener, if I can have a supplementary? Does the current access meet the technical standards for a vehicular access? Thank you.
Mr. Scott, would you like to address that?
Convener, yes. In terms of the technical standards, it's worthy of note that these are engineering works on the footprints that we're talking about. So it would be from the end of the carriageway where it stops up to the boundary of the property, and the making up of that surface with a road construction. That is the technical requirement. So in that respect, it's the engineering specification for that, the materials, the types of materials, how they're laid, and the standard of that particular work. From a technical aspect, from a roads construction consent, we would not be looking at the broader issues that have been discussed earlier, with the exception of looking to see whether there are any inherent high-speed road safety issues that would be incumbent on that. And ultimately, in that regard, we've determined that given the low frequency, the low speed, and the restrictions that have been identified, that the road safety issues themselves would be somewhat negated by the low speeds that would be in place. So fundamentally, Councillor Fotheringham, it is just the physical nature of the works that will be done from the end of the road to the boundary fence.
Sorry, can I come back and the current access, Mr. Scott, does that meet the technical standards?
The current access, in terms of meeting the technical standards, it very much depends on what the proposed use of the land is. At present, there's one of the accesses which has gravel across it up to a timber fence. The other one has, I think, some grassed area up to a timber fence, and there's a gate in that. So for the current pedestrian access that appears to be taken from there, it is adequate. But from a vehicle perspective, the construction would need to be upgraded so that it didn't lead to deterioration of the edging as it was making access to and from the road, the carriageway.
Okay, thank you.
Now, helpful. Councillor Speaker, I'd maybe get you to pop your hand down, please, if that's okay. That's great. Councillor Whiteside, you're next, please.
Thanks, Convener. Can I now actually propose an amendment to the recommendations here?
Well, I just get some advice from committee services.
I think Chair, we're still in a questions session.
Okay, right, we'll deal with questions. Right.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions, Councillor Whiteside?
No further questions at the moment.
Thank you. So, sorry, the next person, my apologies, someone's come up. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Convener. Mr. Scott, we've been hearing about pavement parking and the like. If under the Transport Scotland Act, the cars have to come off the pavement to park, would that still leave access for a vehicle to travel through to the end of the road?
Mr. Scott?
Through you, Convener, yes, it would allow for access based on appropriate car parking of cars and spaces being available. If given the width of the road, a car parked on either side parallel to each other, then there would not be a space. So it very much depend on the circumstances of the vehicles, how they are parked on the carriageway, and the size and manoeuvrability of the vehicle to actually make its way along the carriageway.
So if I can just have a supplementary there, is there any reason why a car could not park either side of the road at the same time, opposite each other?
If cars were to park opposite each other and cause an obstruction, that would be something that Police Scotland may be able to pick up on in terms of obstruction, but it wouldn't be something that as an authority we would have powers ourselves to deal with. It may well be in that instance that if there was a subsequent issue, then some form of traffic regulation and parking prohibitions would need to be introduced to try and control that if it was becoming a material issue.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Braze, I think you're next.
Yes, thanks, Convener. As I understand it, well, this land is obviously accessed already by the farmer. He has access points where he takes machinery, etc., to get into that area of land. Could I ask officers, just for clarity, complete clarity, has the current access ever been a cause for complaint or comment from the police or other emergency services or from any other party?
Through you, if I may, Convener, we've got no records of any such issues being raised with us or complaints that have been highlighted to us.
So it's fair to say that the current arrangements are not subject to any of the subject of any great concern of anyone that we know of.
None that have been reported to us, Councillor Bruce.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else? No, I think comments would be next, but I think we can move. The committee's team can keep me right here. This is a sort of more of a procedural report than a normal report that's coming, so we need to comply with process. As you'll see, the officers are recommending it for approval because it meets all the policies. So can I get some guidance from Mrs. Anderson? Is this the appropriate time now for I'm going to move this report.
Yeah.
It complies with policy and it's recommended by officers. Is it appropriate now for Councillor Whiteside to bring forward an amendment?
Yes, convener, I understand you're moving the recommendations in the report.
Yes, I am.
Do you have a seconder, convener?
Much choice, convener. Councillor Whiteside, do you want to present your amendment, please?
Thank you, convener. Yes, I'd like to recommend a refusal of the application to grant this. We have heard no compelling justification for changing the access into the fields, and we've heard several reasons why this may be a bad idea, and it would certainly disrupt the lives of the residents in the streets. There's no good reason why agricultural access should go through those streets, and I therefore ask if someone is willing to second me.
I'll second you, Councillor Whiteside.
Councillor Cheap?
Okay, is that Councillor? See, there's Councillor Brace has his hand up, I think, before Councillor Cheap spoke. So I'll let the two of you sort it out. Who's seconding Councillor Whiteside?
Councillor Brace, just go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to second Councillor Whiteside.
Thank you very much.
Can I just say a word just now, or do you want me to?
Well, as this is a procedural report, I think I'm going to need to seek some advice here from the legal department about the competency of the amendment before we proceed. So, can I get who wants to help me here from the officer perspective?
Thank you, convener. Yes, no difficulty with the amendment being proposed in the legal sense.
Okay, brilliant. So we've got a motion and an amendment. That's great. Councillor Brace, you want to speak?
Yes, just very briefly, thanks, convener. I think what we have before us here is an application, and the landowner already has access to this field. The emergency services have no problems or issues apparently with his current access, and we have a great deal of people whose lives will be affected, or so they feel. So I'm happy to second this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up for comments now. Anybody else like to make a comment? Councillor Fotheringham?
Convener, I may be totally out of turn here, but I wonder, and we've done this before, just so that members of the committee, I mean, Councillor Whiteside and myself are reasonably familiar with this area, but would it be possible, and you can shoot me down if you want, to maybe have a site visit? Would that be possible? A deferral and have a site visit?
Right.
Just so that the members are well aware of what the area looks like. And
right, I think we need to have a discussion about this, because this is the last meeting of the Communities Committee before the election, so this would knock it into the new the new council. So can I maybe get some officer advice whether this needs to be determined today, or whether we can consider Councillor Fotheringham's proposal?
Gary, do you want to speak on this one, or Walter?
If I can come in, convener.
Yeah,
all I was clear, the application has been with us for some time. Because there wasn't a meeting in January, it's been postponed to this meeting. I just wonder if the applicant would like to comment on any time pressures that they've made in their application.
Yeah, Mr. Todd, can I bring you back in if there's any issues that you need this determined as quickly as possible? You can maybe give us some views.
No, we have no time constraint at the moment.
Right, given that's the case, then I would have no issues with a site visit. I think that's probably the wise way forward, so that everybody can see for themselves this proposal. But I'm thinking, as some of us well, I know some colleagues are not standing again. I'm not sure how that process is going to work, whether it's maybe sensible to bring it to back after the elections and let a fresh group of individuals look at it.
Convener.
I'm open for observations here.
Convener, can I just maybe make some comment at this juncture?
You can.
Yes, Convener, I think if there was, there still is an amendment on the table. If Councillor Whiteside was to withdraw that amendment and the committee were agreed to deferral for a site visit, the members on the site visit would have to be the members who were taking part in the decision-making process from start to finish. So
right.
It wouldn't be simply a deferral for a site visit. It would be a deferral until after the elections. And then the councillors that were appointed to the Communities Committee would then take a view on who would be, that they would then take the site visit. So there would be some delay, but it would have to be after the elections so we could identify who the members were to carry out the site visit.
Okay, so I think I'll go back to Councillor Whiteside and ask her then, would she consider withdrawing her amendment and for a site visit, or does she want to keep moving forward today and we'll take a decision today?
I think the sensible thing is to make a decision today. We've been provided with a lot of information. The maps and the photographs are very useful. I think deferring it for several months till the new committee is in place is unnecessary in this case. I would certainly like to vote on the amendment personally.
Okay, I was just opening it up to get views from colleagues rather than just dismissing Councillor Fotheringham's suggestion. What's the feeling about site visit? Is there anybody who is keen to progress with the site visit or to defer it?
No,
for site visits?
No, Convener.
Okay.
I agree in that I think we have been given the opportunity to see photographs and maps as well. And I feel, although I've not seen it, I feel that this is a residential area which I really would not like to see agricultural vehicles going along. Now, it's obviously, it couldn't be very big agricultural vehicles, but it's still a residential area. And we know the dirt that comes off fields and things. There are another 3 entrances, and I think we should vote on this now.
Okay.
Or indeed the applicant through a very much longer wait.
Okay, thank you. There is, of course, an appeal process on this for either party, depending on the decision it's made today by this committee. So the next one, I think Councillor, it was yours a question, Councillor Moore, the last time, so it's a comment this time.
It's a comment this time.
Thank you, Councillor Moore.
Thank you. As I understand it, we are being asked to approve the engineering works, not whether there is an access into a field or what it's going to become, simply the engineering works that are on the ground. And I can understand the concerns of the residents. I can understand what the desires of the applicant. But as far as I'm concerned, we're simply looking at doing some engineering works. And I think that that is what Mr. Cochrane was saying to us. I'm sure he'll correct me if I'm wrong. But what is there, if I can get down to it, basically on page 14, the plan there is simply showing what we are looking at. And I think that we have to concern ourselves with that, not with what it could be, what it could become, what the motives are. We are simply looking at those works.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Can I maybe bring Mr. Cochrane in just to clarify this point? I think that's an important point that Councillor Moore is bringing up.
Thank you, Convener. Indeed, I think Councillor Moore has summarised the position. We are being asked to construct a piece of, or agree to the construction of a small piece of road which effectively provides access to land, in this case of an agricultural nature. That is the decision that we as officers have been asked to take. We've consulted as we're required to do and received objections on that basis. But yes, that is very much a technical issue. So I know there's lots of other issues that are being discussed around the amenity and width of the road, but this road is a public adopted road. and the proposals here provide access to that, for which we have no difficulties in terms of road safety or otherwise. But I do hear, obviously, the committee's concerns.
Okay, thank you. I think that's been very helpful. Councillor Duff, I think you're next.
Yeah. Thank you, convener. Yes, I mean, as regarding to Councillor Fotheringham's question, any elected member who doesn't have enough information from the paper, I would have thought could have consulted Google Maps or Google Earth or the council's excellent GIS service if they need more information. I don't think we really need to drive down, in my case, drive down to whatever it is, Sidlow area, to look at a cul-de-sac with an access to a field. It seems pretty straightforward to me. I'm kind of quite happy with Councillor Whiteside's amendment. My feeling is this, I'm not altogether sure if this is at the wrong committee. This seems to me more like a planning matter than a roads matter, actually, or that's the impression we're getting from the views of elected members. And you know, I think it's taken a long time to get here. I think we should just make a decision on the evidence we've heard. But you know, if you need more information, Google it.
I'm going to bring Mr. Cochrane because I think there is a misconception here from people thinking this is more of a planning application. And it's not a planning application, it's about roads consent. So I think it's very important that members, when they're making their decision, are actually determining this on the correct processes in their own minds. So I'm going to bring back Mr. Cochrane, because there could be a legal challenge here where the council has to defend the decision that it's taken today. So Mr. Cochrane, please.
Thank you, convener. Indeed, I would wish to point out that road construction consent, which is granted under the Road Scotland Act, is quite separate to the planning process and planning permissions. And indeed, you know, when one sees a housing development, it has to go through both planning permission and road construction consent. Most normally, we don't get objections to road construction consents, but the matter before you today is a road construction consent, not a planning issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful, Mr. Cochrane. Councillor Durno, you're next.
Thanks, convener. I just wanted to say that I agree with everybody else that we should just get on with this today. I mean, it's pretty clear it's a gate at the bottom of a cul-de-sac and you want to take farm machinery through it, and it should have been done years ago when the houses were built if they wanted to build that gate bigger. It's a plan and it is a roads issue, but it should have been done at the time when the houses were built, and I think it's pretty straightforward that we should just get on with it today. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now I've got the officers next. Gary Munro, you're next in line.
Thank you, convener. Put my camera on. Yeah, I just want the Act here, the Road Scotland Act, makes it clear that the decision will be made based on the written representations. You've also had the benefit here of hearing submissions from both parties for and against the application in addition to the written submission. So I would encourage members to make a decision today on the matter.
Thank you. Councillor Cheap.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I think listening to what he's saying and in respect to what Councillor Moore has stated, and then supported by Mr. Cochrane on the technical side of things, I get that, but it doesn't, you know, it's the implications of it that matter here. And I think that the fact there's clearly an implication that's going to come out of this, or why would there be a need for it. So the very thought of taking agricultural vehicles basically through housing estates to get to fields just seems nonsensical to me, when there are other accesses available. And Councillor Devine is right. The mess that comes off tractors and vehicles in agricultural land, which isn't cleared up quick enough, certainly isn't cleared up by the farmers quick enough. It's just not what you want to have coming through a housing site, as far as I'm concerned. So I get what they're saying about the technical side on roads build or access, but it's the implications that will come out of that I'm voting on today.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brace.
Yes, thanks, convener. A comment, just that I note that while we have an officer recommendation here that comes with conditions, and none of those conditions would prevent large agricultural vehicles from using this proposed access and this bit of road that goes into the access. Thanks.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Whiteside.
Thank you, Convener. Just a comment on Councillor Moore's comments. Although it is an engineering issue and it's a roads matter, the point I made earlier was that there was no compelling justification for it. So there's no point in changing the roads if there's not a good reason for it. And agricultural access is not a good reason in this case.
Okay, I think we'll go to the vote.
Okay, Convener.
Point of order, Convener. Under a road's construction consent, does there have to be justification for it?
Gary, do you want to cover that, or Donald?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in on that.
Mr. Cochrane, I see his hands up as well. We'll come to you Ian in a minute if that's all right.
Yeah, the act's non-specific here, so essentially here you either uphold the representations or you don't. That's really the justification here. So if you are going to uphold the representations, it'd be helpful if you could document how much weight you attach to each particular one, because at the back of this there could be an appeal either way. Both parties have a right of appeal, whether you find for or against. So whichever decision you make, as long as you can justify it, that's really the test here.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cochrane, did you want to come in?
I think all I would have added was the under the road construction consent. It's just an application. We have an application in front of us, so the applicant today has given you some views on why they want that application, and obviously it's up to the applicant to put that forward.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll just go back to the vote where I started a minute or two ago.
Yes, Convener. So the motion in front of the committee is moved by yourself, Councillor Salmond, seconded by Councillor Stewart, and the motion is to move the recommendations in report 46/22, which is to agree to grant consent to the construction consent at Meadowbank Gardens Wellbank and Meadowbank View Wellbank. The amendment moved by Councillor Whiteside, seconded by Councillor Brays, is to refuse both applications for road consent construction at Meadowbank Gardens and Meadowbank View Wellbank. The members vote for motion and amendment. Councillor Salmond.
Motion.
Councillor Stewart.
Motion.
Councillor Brays.
Amendment.
Councillor Cheap.
Amendment.
Councillor Devine.
Amendment.
Councillor Duff.
Amendment.
Councillor Durno. Amendment. Councillor Fotheringham.
Amendment.
Councillor Lumgear.
Motion.
Councillor Whiteside.
Amendment.
Councillor McLaren.
Motion.
Councillor Moore.
Motion.
Councillor Proctor. Councillor Proctor.
Sorry, been on mute. Amendment.
Councillor Speed.
Amendment.
And Councillor Wan.
Motion.
It is 6 for the motion and 9 for the amendment. Therefore, the committee has agreed to refuse to grant the roads construction for Meadowbank Gardens and Meadowbank View Wellbank.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. Before we move to the next report, can I just thank Mr. Todd, Mr. Harper and Mr. Cool for attending today, and you can now leave the meeting if you wish, and we will move on to report number 5. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Convener. Before we leave item 4, please can I know what the grounds for the refusal were? Mr. Munro has said that we must document our decision. I would like to know what we've decided.
Mr. Munro or Mr. McCaskill?
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful just to say which representations you attach the most weight to here. I think that'd be helpful just to have that documented.
So would that be Councillor Whiteside and Councillor Braze as the mover and the seconder of the amendment then that would present these just now?
Well, I think that all members who voted that way, it'd be helpful to hear from them.
Right, thank you. So we need to go through that process then. So can I maybe just get Mrs. Anderson to alphabetically go through each of the members who voted for the amendment to give their reasonings, please? So, and I take it that we're still recording this, are we?
Yes, Convener.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Braze.
Yes, thank you. I based my decision on common sense, and I listened and gave weight to the people who were objecting to this. Thank you.
Can I just ask Mr. Munro, is that a relevant reason?
If Councillor Braze has attached weight to all representations, that's sufficient, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cheap.
Yep, thanks. Mine is on the basis that I listened to what the applicant had to say and also to what Mr. Cool had to say on behalf of a number of people that saw the amount of representation from the residents as well and read all of these. And as I said in my comment before, I'm concerned about the implications of granting this. Why do they need it when they have other alternative accesses? There's something behind that's the reason why it's best that it was actually voted against in that case to protect the neighbourhood.
Councillor Devine.
I don't think I want to see any more than Councillor Cheap or Councillor Brace has said. I'm quite happy to just go along with that. We have listened to the residents, and I do feel that it would be a diminution of their quality of life.
Councillor Duff.
Yes, I think we've listened to the views of the residents. There's an access requirement for an agricultural field. There are alternative access points, so I think to go use Councillor Bray's words, it's common sense. Why do you need another access through a residential street? It just seems crazy to me. So yeah, I think listen to the representations, applied a bit of common sense, and there seems alternative access points to the field which will not impinge on anyone's quality of life.
Councillor Duff. Sorry, Councillor Durno.
Thanks. Yeah, similar. There's access to the field. Happy about large, the size of the vehicles nowadays for farming coming down somebody's street. It would just take a moment of a child going in front of one of these large vehicles, and it's too dangerous. So that's my point. Thank you.
Councillor Fotheringham.
Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. Yes. Like my colleagues, it's a difficult one, but I've read all the representations. I listened to the applicant and the objectors, and I have obviously asked some questions of the officers. I don't want to see larger vehicles or farm vehicles going through a residential area. I asked Mr. Scott the question for a purpose, and that was, is the existing access satisfactory? It is satisfactory, therefore I stick by my decision. Thank you.
Councillor Whiteside.
Thank you. The representations of the residents were far more compelling, in my opinion, than those of the applicants, and there is already suitable access for agricultural vehicles.
Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. I would say that road safety, the residents' concern, and that the fact that there is satisfactory access to the field, which has been used over the years, requires the matter should be taken forward. Thank you.
And finally, Councillor Speed.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, I took my decision based on concerns around the impact on this community, which may see a reduction in their quality of life, and in terms of road and pedestrian safety, and particularly those residents who may be protected under the Equalities Act 2010. Thank you.
Convener, that's all members.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues. That's been helpful. Thank you. So I think we can now move on to agenda item number 5, which is the pavement parking prohibition roads assessment criteria. Is there any questions on this report? No questions. Any comments on this report? Councillor Speed. Sorry, you're on mute, Councillor Speed.
Okay. Thanks again, Councillor Salmond. Yeah, it was just a question that kind of popped up when I was looking at some of the pictures on the last agenda item. And we could see in one picture there was, I think, 3 or 4 cars all along the same stretch that were parked on the pavement. And I just wondered, given the kind of method within the report in terms of the grading, as to how the roads team might assess and give exemption in certain streets and areas, as to whether they could say, where would that road, that particular, not necessarily that road, but that example, where it might see displacement of cars elsewhere. But yeah, where would it where would it land? Who would likely benefit? Would it be the pedestrian or would it be the car? Would there be an exemption given in that type of example?
Mr. Scott, would you like to take that one on, please?
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Councillor Speed. The presumption is that there should be no parking on pavements. That is the prohibition, the parking prohibition that is included within the Transport Scotland Act. It is only by exception and by exemption that pavement parking would be allowed. In the criteria as assessed, we will be looking at the current practice, the current availability of space on the carriageway. It would be inherent on drivers to park appropriately in that respect, and therefore should not be causing undue obstruction, and should still allow for vehicles to stay on the carriageway and for pavements in this instance to be used by those who will be walking and wheeling on them. So the assessment will factor these things in respect of displacement of parking, where that might lead to an elongation because you're not able to necessarily provide the space on the carriageway. That would be something that we would be assessing. But again, it would be down to good behaviour, good parking practice from residents and from people on the streets. And as intimated in the report, it is something ahead of the completion of the assessments that we would be seeking communication with elected members on their experience and views in respect of their boroughs and the places that they're aware that there are issues.
Okay, can I just double check, Mr. Scott, that at the end of the process it will be the elected members that make the final decisions?
The intention in terms of item 3, the recommendation 3, Convener, is that a report will be brought back for a committee decision on where the parking prohibitions will be in place, which, as I've indicated, will be everywhere except for where there are exceptions for specific reasons. But it will be for the committee to make the decision.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Stewart.
I've further comments. Can I come back in after, if that's okay?
Yeah, Councillor Salmond? Question. Yeah. No, we're doing comment. Well, I'd asked for questions. I didn't find any, but then I went to comments. But I think you had a late question. So, Councillor Stewart, is yours a question or a comment?
That's just a comment.
Right. Can I just double check there's no further questions first before we go to comments? No, right, we'll do Councillor Stewart, then we'll go back to Councillor Speed for a comment. So,
sorry, Convener, I did have a question. My hand's up.
My apologies. You're shown as third on my ranking, so apologies. So, a question on you go.
I'm sure it's easily done. Yes, thanks, convener. Yes, you asked the part of the question I was going to ask of officers. So yes, it will come back. The proposals for where we allow cars to park will come back for decision by council. I just wanted to make sure that it was going to be possible for councillors, rather than just reject a whole tranche because of parking places, because maybe one or two of them didn't seem appropriate, we would be allowed to amend to exclude a few of officers' recommended parking places on particular pavements. Is that right?
Scott, would you like to address that?
In terms of the where the assessments are currently likely to head and foreseen to go forward, there will be very limited exceptions that will be promoted and brought before councillors in that respect to honour the spirit and the letter of the legislation to seek to prevent pavement parking. It would only be where that is current custom and practice and where the layout would be satisfactory to ensure full accessibility and road safety. But as I indicated earlier, and just to confirm, Councillor Brays, the ultimate decision on the where we issue the exemptions and therefore allow pavement parking would be one for elected members.
Okay,
that's
thank
fine.
you. That's
Thank
extremely
you.
clear, Mr. Scott. Thank you. Now back to Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, I'm just really happy that this is proceeding now, going ahead. It can't come in quickly enough for me, the pavement parking. I do have concerns though on how this is going to be policed once they've brought it in and decided where there will be parking bans. You know what I mean? Evenings and weekends, we don't have any of our own enforcement officers out, and it's probably highly unlikely that the police will enforce anything, you know, in the areas that are identified. And we've got lots of families now, you know, 2-car families, narrow streets. We've seen that in some of the photographs. And it just does concern me, because I see it every day where maybe houses have a driveway, but only one car able to park in there. The other one is parked on the street, and they do tend to park on pavements. I've seen issues with people in wheelchairs struggling to get by. In one instance, I've already highlighted this previously, where there was a wee lad in a wheelchair came down my street heading to school, and he actually fell out of the wheelchair because of the camber on the pavement. But that was, you know, he had to go round onto the road as well, and that was where he ended up toppling over. So yeah, it can't come in quick enough for me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think that's quite an important point you've raised there, Councillor Stewart. Maybe Mr. Scott could address how this is going to be enforced and who's going to enforce it.
Yes, convener, happy to come in on that. This will fall under decriminalised parking legislation, so our own community enforcement wardens will be empowered to actually issue fixed penalty notice. Pavement parking is occurring, and it is not in an area that is exempt to allow for that. As Councillor Stewart did recognise, that may well place a burden on the extending the hours of said enforcement, and that would ultimately be something that would be included within that further report to the committee in respect of the exemptions and then the ramifications of that. It's an area that's still under review and in ongoing discussions with Transport Scotland as to how the enforcement will actually work, as well as the potential funding for such. And also, as Councillor Stewart had rightly pointed out, that the police retain with the new legislation the ability to enforce, as well as our own enforcement wardens.
Okay, thank you. Right, back to Councillor Speed now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I welcome this report and fully support the implementation of the parking ban. I think we really just can't underestimate the impact that pavement parking has on our residents. I know many constituents of mine, you know, fear going out. You know, pavement parking does result in social isolation. People can't get out and about safely. The thought of going out is just too overwhelming because they, you know, as Councillor Stewart described, often have to go from the pavement to the road on towards oncoming traffic. You know, and that can be many times within one short trip, as well as other obstacles such as kind of wheelie bins and other street furniture and things. So you know, really hope that, you know, we don't take this lightly, that we do have the right resources in place to support this, and that, you know, there really is an opportunity here to improve the quality of life of many of our residents who are pedestrians and who choose active travel, or where active travel is their only means of getting around. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Speed. Councillor Proctor, I think you're next.
Thanks very much, Convener. I'll try and be brief. I agree with Councillor Stewart's sentiments entirely. It can't really come in quick enough. And I've seen similar incidents happen in the narrow streets in Kirriemuir. But I am also heartened by Mr. Scott's sort of saying that, you know, a common sense approach will be made, and I think that's that is absolutely essential, because each location varies, and we're going to have the same. But like Councillor Stewart, I agree it can't come in soon enough, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Councillor Moore, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I welcome this. It can't come in soon enough, especially in certain areas. The main problem that I can see with it, which I hope will be addressed in the report, is how it will be policed, because I don't think Police Scotland will give it a lot of credence. They're already stretched thinly, and our enforcement officers will not be working 24/7. So I suggest that this is going to be an area that will be the most concern, how we're going to make sure it works.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have a comment? No. Let's just go to the recommendations then. There's 3 recommendations: note, approves and notes. We're happy to agree the report.
Agree.
Thank you. Next to report number 6, which is the Road Safety Framework to 2030 update. Is there any questions on this report? No questions? Any comments on this report? No. Okay, we'll go with the recommendations then. If nobody wants to say anything, I'll be happy to agree the report.
Agreed.
Good, thank you. So we're moving to number 7, which is the school exclusion zones at Ferrydown School, Langlands Primary and Muirfield Primary School. Any questions on this one? Thank you, Councillor Moore.
Yes, Convener, it's just to give notice of an amendment when it's appropriate.
Thank you. We'll move to Councillor Cheap then.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about the previous report, but I was waiting for this report to come along to ask about how this would be policed. I'm all in support of the concept of it all, but the policing of it is essential. Knowing school parents as I do, they will pull in anywhere they can do to drop off their children, and it's a concern that this could be completely ignored if it's not duly policed. I'm just, first of all, wondering, I do have a supplementary to this as well, but if somebody could just come back to me as to how that would be, otherwise it becomes a bit of a white elephant idea, because if people will just say, oh, there's no problem with it, they'll ignore it, you know. So
we'll
see
bring
Mr.
Scott. This has been in operation in the 3 locations for about the last 12 months, I think, Mr. Scott, but maybe you can give us a bit of feedback, please.
Through you, Convener. Yeah, I think Councillor Cheap's comments are very well made and very, very relevant in terms of this, and that really is one of the reasons why we're introducing this in a phased manner. So the 3 school sites that we identified were very much the trial. The additional sites are very much what's now going to fall into the correctly referred to an experimental traffic regulation order, and therefore it is about identifying compliance and any issues that come from that. We did foresee that there might be some enforcement issues, and it might be a potential drain on our resources in that respect. Again, this is something that our own enforcement wardens can deal with, as well as Police Scotland. The experience that we've had for these 3 sites is that it has been required very light enforcement. I think there needs to be a push in the early stages. It needs to be well communicated to residents, to parents, to children, to the school. And the emphasis really is on the buy-in from the school itself to get the correct messaging out to parents on good parking behaviour and safe behaviour in that regard. So after a few very minor teething issues very early on, most of these sites now are pretty much self-regulating. That's not to say that there aren't issues that flag up on certain locations, but ultimately we can pick those up in the rounds. So in terms of the initial 3 and the opportunity for a further experiment with the additional sites, that would be something that we would be monitoring in terms of how straightforward they are to enforce, and ideally they become self-enforcing.
Okay, before I come back to Councillor Cheap, I just want Mr Scott to probably make a point that in the first 3 trials, the local members were heavily involved on a regular basis in this. Will that apply to the next set of sites as well?
Convener, that's a really relevant point in respect of the stakeholder forums that we've established for each of the locations. We would replicate that in the new school sites. So that does involve local elected members. It does involve the school, and they very much play a key role on that. It also includes officers from across roads and transportation and the education side of things from and children and learning from ourselves, and also Police Scotland are involved in that process as well. So it very much is an open stakeholder, and the discussions for this particular school, it does allow us in those individual forums to discuss the issues that are relevant to that particular location, because they're similar, but they all have a different context depending on which school we're talking about.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Back to Councillor Cheap.
Yeah, thank you, Convener, and I appreciate getting a chance to come back on this. Thanks, Mr Scott, and that's clear. I think it's quite useful, this being a communities meeting. I've actually had representation from 1 or 2 people about this, and they're asking the question just on, as this is like being used as tests, will there be any, and concern with cars sitting, exhaust fumes, etc., asking whether if any air monitoring is done as part of the test before, during and after the process, because that's a very strong argument as to why things can proceed if you can give evidence of that to those who will be against it.
Mr Scott.
Through you, Convener, yes, indeed, that is one of the criteria. The environmental benefits is something that we seek to monitor and evaluate. And ideally, in that respect, Councillor Cheap, we would hope that some of the monitoring and evaluation will sit very neatly with the schools themselves in some of their activities, and therefore, if we can integrate some of the benefits of bringing that data in about air quality, then that would be something that we would hope the schools, as I say, would self-enforce, because they would be the ones putting out the message on ensuring that air quality is improved by people complying with the school exclusion zones.
That's great. Okay. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Duff, you're next.
Right, thanks, Convener. Yes, I think I would only comment about the 2 in Montrose that I know well. That the Ferry Den one, I think, is very straightforward. It's a small cul-de-sac. It has minimal problems. The trial seems to have been successful, and clearly we all know that there were problems parking and whatever at Ferry Den before. I have to say I have got some fairly serious concerns about the South Esk site. That is a heavily populated area. There's lots of houses round about it. The roads that we look like we're going to be blocking off are part of the sort of north-south routes through that area. I don't know how much work has been done at looking at whether the other roads parallel have got the capacity to take the traffic. and clearly a considerable number of residents are going to be inconvenienced by this, I would have thought. So I am concerned that with this one, I mean, the Ferryden one is very straightforward and low risk. I think this one potentially, we might have a lot of unintended consequences about this one. I know there's been parking problems at the school. I think there was certainly I was involved in trying to get some more yellow lines round about the school in the past. And there has been probably irresponsible parking at the school gate. But there are people who live in the vicinity. There's a lot of houses, flats nearby, and there are through routes here. So I think this one needs to be handled very carefully.
Okay, I'm sure Mr. Scott will take that on board. Okay, where are we? Councillor Whiteside.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I welcome this report. I'm sure many of the other members will agree that traffic and parking around schools is one issue that we get contacted by all the time. My question is around schools where their location means that exclusion zones won't be possible. I'm just wondering if there's much work being done on further measures that can be taken in those cases. It's maybe a question for another time, and if Walter wants to come back to me out with the meeting, I'd be happy with that.
Mr. Scott, would you like to come back after the meeting, or do you want to take it?
Yeah, I can come back and discuss those. I think what we're looking at are the priority sites at the moment where school exclusion zones are required. I'd be very interested in the future to be contemplating how we go about improving access and making our access to some of the more rural schools a little bit better, which may be where Councillor Whiteside is coming from. So yeah, very happy to have a discussion with Councillor Whiteside after the meeting.
Great, thank you. So it's where are we? Councillor Proctor next.
Thank you very much, Convener. Yeah, I agree with it. I agree with the report, and I really think it's great that the system that Mr. Scott mentioned by engaging with the schools and other agencies to make sure the thing runs smoothly is good. Air quality and pollution is a problem. At these places, at these pinch points, I've seen it. Particularly on a cold day, you can see the reek rising. One question I'd just like to ask, when Webster's High School and Northmuir Primary School, which are actually quite serious places for parking, are they going to be having it looked at in the future?
Mr. Scott, would you like to address that?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Convener. Yeah, thanks, Councillor Proctor. Our intention would be, if we continue to have successful application and delivery of school exclusion zones, that we would seek to exhaust that benefit across all of our school sites. It is something that is subject to these experimental orders, and there is a degree of flexibility that can be adopted into them to ensure that they are successful. But ultimately, if they're not successful, then we can return to the status quo. But our belief is that there will be many more school sites where some of the measures that we're proposing within the school exclusion zones may well prove to be of benefit. And in terms of that, we're quite happy to hear about all those things. But ultimately, most of these things do get reported periodically through our traffic coord group, and therefore that's the main driver for identifying which of the sites that we've prioritised as presented within the report.
Thank you. Councillor Durno, you're next.
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to ask Mr. Scott, there's going to be 300 odd houses that are going to be built behind Muirfield School in the future. And obviously there's going to be a lot more traffic in that area as well. Would this be looked at again once the houses are built? Because obviously there'll be other plans, cycle paths, etc., maybe coming from the housing estate. Can we go back and look at this through planning at a later date? Because I'm just feeling that maybe with more traffic going to be in that area, there might be disruption with diggers and things coming into that area, for building equipment, etc. Is that something we can maybe look at closely, just in case there's any problems with that?
Mr. Scott.
Yeah, I think in terms of the planning decisions and the implications there, that will be straying off my remit. In respect of the roads themselves, we do have the ability and the opportunity to be reviewing the orders that we put in place. As indicated within the report, the introduction of the new experimental traffic regulation orders should allow us a hugely more flexible means of testing out on the ground. and actually modifying to see how that works on the ground as well. So if there are changes required as a result of development or any change in circumstances at these sites, we'll be very, very happy to review those. And ultimately, we're still early enough in the day where we're building our knowledge of all the sites. So whilst we're looking for the decision today to make permanent the first 3, it doesn't mean to say that we'll be taking our full attention away from those particular sites. We'll continue to garner the views and ensure that they are being successful and monitor and evaluate those so that will aid our thinking.
Yeah, that's great. It was just for the school crossing patrol people that I'm worried about, because obviously they're going to have more children crossing because they're not getting dropped off at the school. And if there's going to be construction vehicles as well, it's all getting quite dangerous. So if we could look back at that at a later date, that would be great. Thank you, Walter.
Thank you. Councillor Devine, you're next.
Yes, Walter, you were talking about air monitors, and I was wondering, I know that at Langland, who did the air monitoring, are schools themselves going to be given air quality monitors so that they can do something about that and continue, or at least move them around the schools perhaps? I don't suppose they're particularly cheap, but it would be good to be able to continue to monitor this situation, I think.
So you convener, the Councillor Devine, you're right in that respect. It was SEPA, as the convener had noted earlier on, in respect of the various stakeholders and partnership approach we've taken here. It was SEPA themselves who were undertaking the air quality monitoring for us at the sites, because this is very much part of their remit, where we have had discussions, and that was in respect of as much from an educational perspective with the schools as to how do we go on continuing to monitor these sites for air quality and monitor the schools as well. So whilst you're right, the equipment that SEPA are using can be very expensive because of the nature of it. It would be a really good opportunity for us to work with the schools and colleagues there to see if there is anything that within the school itself, such monitoring can be included within the curriculum.
Okay, thank you. Now, Councillor Moore, I believe you have an amendment. So I'm going to hold the motion on this to start with, and I'm happy to hear your amendment.
Thank you, convener. It's a very simple amendment. I agree recommendations 1, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. With regard to recommendation 1, 6, I would ask that Letham Primary School is removed from the list. And the reasons for that, if members will go to, I think it's page 94. Yep, page 94 of their papers. You will see where the school exclusion zone is to be. The upper end of that school exclusion zone is not a problem, except that the road to the right is actually unadopted. If you come along past the school, where the word Bray Head is, and just going south of that a bit, is actually an unadopted section of road. And you come down to the southern end of the zone, and that is just around the corner by the manse, and that is where the adopted road ceases. And all members will be aware of Bray Head Road, Letham. It was in the unadopted roads motion. Our Director of Infrastructure included it in the 3 roads that caused most concern to this council. And what we're going to say is anybody living on that road is going to have to drive the length of the unadopted road to get out at the southern end, because for 2 hours a day, they're not going to be allowed to drive past the school. And I think there needs to be more consideration of how this is going to work before we include it in the next round of school exclusions. And I'm hoping that somebody will give me a seconder.
Well, before we get a seconder, if it's all right, can I maybe get Mr. Scott to come in, probably as the professional officer, and maybe give us a reason into why this has been included after hearing from Councillor Moore there. So
yeah, thanks, Convener. I think I'd like to raise three points in respect of why we'd prioritise these additional 5 sites. They are on the basis of where we get the most reports of issues and therefore areas for improvement. In respect of the access that residents in this instance has been experienced within the first 3 sets of trials, there is a permit to allow access for residents. The school exclusion is for other vehicles, not residential vehicles in that instance. And the third element, again, just an emphasis that this gives us the opportunity for an experimental traffic regulation order. And in that sense, the minimum period by which we would have to have that on the ground, where we would welcome consultations for experience as to how that is working, would be 6 months. That 6 months can be extended if there are any modifications that are required through learning our lessons as we go. And ultimately, if the experiments prove to be less successful or unsuccessful, it allows us then not to proceed with a permanent order. And therefore, the added flexibility of having an experimental traffic regulation order that is usable allows us to proceed with this type of activity where we're understanding that there might be modifications required as we go before we make any of these regulation orders permanent.
Mr. Scott, can I just ask you a question, just to pick up on Councillor Moore's point about this being an unadopted road? And I'm conscious the council has a policy on unadopted roads. Can I just ask you, is this proposal, does it conflict with our policy? No.
The policy in terms of unadopted roads or roads not on a list of public roads is that we do not, as a matter of course, without specific direction by committee, undertake any works of maintenance or repair. We do retain through the Road Scotland Act duties and powers in respect of roads, whether they be private roads, as in unadopted, or be they public roads, as in those that are adopted. So there is no conflict in terms of our policy in that respect.
Okay, well, thank you. After hearing that, I'm prepared to move the report as is. Do I have a seconder for moving the report as is?
I'll second that, Convener.
Thank you. Now, I think Councillor Moore was looking for a seconder for his amendment. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Moore's amendment? No seconder, so the motion is carried. Is there any other comments? Do colleagues want to make any comments on the agreed report?
If I could convene.
Yeah, sorry, I've still got some hands up. So could Councillor Durno and Councillor Moore maybe remove their hands at the moment so I can get the fresh hands to come up on the screen? Thank you. And I think Councillor Bray, you're next.
Right, thanks, Convener. A quick comment. It was just to say, I think these experimental TROs are a fantastic tool to have in the chest, because I would have been quite uncomfortable, particularly with the South East School one, to go ahead with a permanent TRO. But since we can do this experimental thing, as Mr. Scott has clearly articulated, it gives us an opportunity to tweak things during the process and come up with what turns out to be the best solution in any particular area. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Speed, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick comment, just to say, like the pavement parking ban, I welcome this report. It's another report that puts people first, particularly our children and young people, and helps ensure their safe passageway to school. So I very much welcome this. I think just picking up on some of the earlier comments around kind of carbon emissions and testing, it would be good to get a bit more data and detail with regards to that and the positive impacts that the reducing traffic levels in and around schools will have. I really sticks out the deputation that was made in one of our committee meetings from a respiratory nurse and her support of active travel, and her, I guess, quite quite stark description that she gave in terms of the impact on us all because of pollution and the long-term health effects it can have. So yeah, I very much welcome this and the positive differences it can make. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Speed. Anybody else? No, well, I think we've agreed the report, so we can now move on to agenda item number 8, which is a skidding resistance plan.
Convener, please note my dissent.
Okay, can I get the clerk to note that, please? Thank you. Agenda item number 8, skidding resistance plan. Probably a technical report, this, but do you have any questions? No questions. Any comments on this? No. So we're happy to agree the recommendations. Okay, thank you. Okay, we can move on to the next one, which is the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009 update, when I managed to get to that one. Do you have any questions on this report? Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Mayor. I do welcome the report, and I feel that you know the weather we've been having of late, and when I say of late, I mean over the past few years, is going to continue, and this has been discussed at the member officer working group dealing with flooding. One question for Mr. Scott: how do we feel about the finances, you know, ongoing for the future, because this problem is going to get worse. And one of the things that we discussed at Remember Officer Working Group was the situation in Montrose, you know, with coastal erosion, and certain monies have been sort of put in place, but will that be sufficient?
Mr. Scott, would you like to take that one on?
Thanks, Convener. Thanks to the Provost for the question there. Yes, the funding position, as always, in terms of the public pound, is challenging. I think we do have particular identified needs and priorities that we've stipulated within the local flood risk management plan that we consulted on, which very much did highlight the importance of undertaking adaptation and intervention works within Montrose to deal with the coastal erosion and the flooding that comes from that. The challenge, as noted within the report, and as intimated by Councillor Proctor, is in terms of the availability of that funding. Historically, it's been 80% from Scottish Government and 20% from the Council or other sources. Whilst the 80-20 split may well continue into the future, the availability of funding is somewhat challenged. And as indicated and detailed in the report, there are ongoing discussions with COSLA leaders in respect of what availability for the cycle 2, which is from 2022 to 26, there will be for additional schemes. It's a challenging enough financial environment to complete the schemes within cycle 1, which is between 2016 and 2022, which thankfully our scheme in Arbroath is reaching a completion this summer, in which case our scheme is completed in cycle 1, but others are delayed, and therefore it is a very challenging financial future that we're looking for. And ultimately, in terms of the need to bring back a report to after the local government elections, it will be something that will be a material decision for the committee to make then.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Duff, I think you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yes, I welcome this report, and like Councillor Proctor, I'm on the flood MOG. Yeah, it's quite. I think I would say in Montrose there are 3 particular concerns. There is the coastal erosion concern, which has been well documented over the last few years. There is the concern about sewage flooding, which is again been a long-running concern, and I think quite a serious one. And I have discussed that with Mr. Scott, and clearly that is very much in the court of Scottish Water, but that is causing some serious concerns with a number of residents, a number of streets, and certainly close to my home, there's been a lot of flooding in Hillside, which has been quite serious in the last couple of years. And I am pleased to report that a Tayside Contract Squad were on site at the list this week, doing some sort of restorative engineering, which is really pleased to see. That's been, I think, much welcomed, and I think we're expecting some more. So, but yeah, I'm generally concerned about the funding of a lot of this. We know that there's funding for the Dynamic Coast 2, if you like, the infill work, which I think is in the budget in the near term. But yeah, I think there are concerns about funding going further forward.
Anybody else? No. Okay, we'll move to the recommendations then, which are notes and approves. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. So next one is number 10. Here we go. So this is the former St Thomas Primary School seat in Wood Arbroath. Could it maybe bring in Mr Cochrane just to clarify the recommendations here? There's a slight
Thanks, convener. Indeed,
layout of this. So
thanks, convener. If I can just draw members' attention to both the item 10 and 11, that both these reports have previously gone to Policy and Resources Committee, and Policy and Resources Committee agreed them, and particularly they agreed item 1 in terms of declaring the site surplus. They come before Policy and Resources in order to agree to approve the transfer to the HRA. They are really in front of you this afternoon to similarly approve that, but from the point of view of managing the HRA account.
thank you. I hope that makes that clear, and apologies on behalf of the team that put the paper together for that sort of misalignment of 1 and 2. So is there any questions on this one? Any comments on this
I
one?
can see Councillor Duff's hand.
Oh, my apologies, Councillor Duff. I thought it might have been an old hand, but Councillor Duff, sorry, is it a new hand?
Oh, sorry, it's a legacy hand, which I will bring.
Sorry, yeah, sorry. Great. So Councillor Speed, thank you.
Just a comment, if that's okay, Councillor Salmond.
Yeah, when you go.
Yeah, I probably just can't express just how delighted I am with this report, and more than happy to approve it. I'm sure, Councillor Salmond, you know just how much I have kind of advocated in terms of the needs of tenants and applicants, and I think, like many other councillors here today, my caseload in terms of constituency work is very much taken up by housing matters, and this will make a considerable difference in terms of the capacity here to increase council stock within the Arbroath East and Lunan area, where there is great demand. It might not make a difference overnight to many that are on those long lists, but it certainly will in the future ensure that we improve the housing and health and well-being of our residents. So thank you.
Thank you. And I've done behind the scenes to get this report in front of the committee as quickly as possible so that we can actually proceed to be building social housing in Angus. Okay, Councillor Dornot.
Yeah, I welcome this report as well. I just hope that it doesn't take 2 years before there's a sort of spade goes to ground, because that's usually what happens when we get developments, because as Councillor Spade said already, our caseload for new houses is really high, so we need to get this up and running. I take it, Mr Cochrane, this will actually come to planning as well, so if it is, I won't say too much more.
Thank you, Councillor Durno. Indeed, it will need to come to planning.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, thanks. I look forward to seeing it, and hopefully it won't be too long.
Okay, anybody else? No. So can we agree then, recommendation 2? Agreed.
Agreed.
We'll move on to number 11, which is a very similar report but in a different town. So, any questions on the Forfar one? Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, convener. As a veterans champion, I just would like to ask Mr. Morrow if he's available. Would this site provide an opportunity to develop some further affordable housing for veterans, perhaps similar to the very successful project that we had at Camas, Crescent and Carnoustie? Now, I remember this wasn't popular by all the Carnoustie councillors when it was first mooted, but eventually it was, and it's a great success story, and I hope that we could maybe replicate this maybe in Forfar. And we should remember that the Camas Carnoustie project actually got national awards, and hope we could maybe replicate this in Forfar in the future. So maybe Mr. Morrow could give me some answers on that.
Okay, Mr. Morrow, are you with us?
Yeah, thank you for your convener.
Can I maybe get you to cover off Councillor Proctor's point and also your view on what kind of housing could go on this site, please?
Yeah, thanks, convener, and thanks, Provost, for the question. I mean, I think that sounds like a sound suggestion, and certainly the nature of this particular site and its location would suggest that it could lend itself to an initiative of the kind that you described there. And we could certainly explore potential partnership opportunities with veterans organisations, of which, as you know, there are quite a few, to see how part of the development proposals could incorporate some sort of veterans housing model. And we would have to be careful that it meets the specific needs of their client group, and that would depend to some extent on which organisations we were potentially partnering with. But if members will be happy for us to take that forward, that's something we could explore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrow.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask you also, Mr. Morrow, just to address the other point I made about what other style of social housing you foresee on the site?
Yeah, thanks, convener. And I suppose it's worth maybe just taking the opportunity to think about in the context of both this site and the previous agenda item, that both these proposals, I think, do demonstrate the council's commitment to delivering the priorities that we've set out in the Angus Community Plan. Growing the availability of social and affordable housing is really critical to improving people's health and well-being, both physical and mental, and also directly addressing child poverty. In Forfar particularly, there are currently over 1,300 applications for affordable housing, and 700 of these are from households considered as having unmet housing need. So in other words, the demand for affordable housing in Forfar is very real, and the need to provide obviously good quality accommodation for lower income families is also very real. So if the council ourselves can develop these sites, we believe it will help people in Angus have access to a range of affordable housing options that support our communities to flourish in the future. In terms of this particular site, the HRA would own and develop the site, but the proposal is to have a mix of affordable housing, as the site is of a size that could accommodate an approach like that. And it's in line with our local housing strategy objective of having mixed models of affordable housing available across Angus. So as we said in the report, we would have a focus on shared equity and perhaps low-cost home ownership for sale and some mid-market rent, as well as potentially a model of housing that the Provost has just suggested, some housing for veterans. We have done this type of broad mix of housing, affordable housing models before in the south of Angus, and this site potentially gives us an opportunity to continue that approach in the west. It's likely there would still be a proportion of housing on the site which would be for council rent, but the numbers and split would be subject to discussion with the Scottish Government, as is our usual process, to ensure that it can attract grant funding and form part of our agreed objectives in the Strategic Housing Investment Plan. Does that, hopefully that covers off your question?
It does, I think that's very thorough. Councillor Devine, you're next.
Yeah, well, I think it is thorough, and I'm glad to hear it, convener, because we did touch on it at Policy and Resources, and I was concerned that it was mostly going down the route of all shared equity. So I'm really pleased to hear Mr. Morrow saying that there will be some social housing for rent in there too, because as he said, there is a huge need in Forfar for social rent, and I think it's a great opportunity to have a mixed range of housing there. Thank you.
Yes, I picked up the same messages as you earlier, so that was how I was keen for Mr. Morrow to give a detailed explanation to the potential of this site. So thank you very much, Mr. Morrow. Anybody else? No. Okay, can we go to agree the recommendation then? Is that agreed?
Thank
you. Right, so got the page. Number 12, which is delivering a local biodiversity action in Angus via the Edinburgh Biodiversity Declaration and the Nature Restoration Fund. Any questions on this one? Councillor Devine?
Yeah, just wondering on the second recommendation, whether this is going to be a kind of bidding in process for community groups, or is it going to be just for council officers?
Okay, which officer? Sorry, Councillor, which officer would like to take this question? Jill, sorry, Mrs. Patterson.
Thanks, Councillor Devine. Feedback we've had from Nature Scott and other partners is the Nature Restoration Fund, due to the scale of projects for this particular sort of remit coming up, is likely to be, significant scale, so a sort of collaborative process. I know a couple of community groups have approached them in the context of the Nature Restoration Fund, and there's probably still scope within the grant allocations through local government to be able to do that at the smaller scale, but certainly this larger fund that's tied in with the Edinburgh Declaration is for significant scale projects, so is aimed at public sector partners across the board.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, anybody else with any questions? No. Any comments? Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, the recommendations. Climate change has been across the world, as we see in the daily news. Storms Arwen, Barra, Corrie, Dudley, Eunice and Franklin have all hit us in the space of 2 months. And their friends, Gladys, Herman, Imani, Jack, Kim, Logan and others, are potentially coming towards us. The impact on Scotland has been massive. The loss of trees, the loss of fields to housing, reducing habitat for animals, such as red squirrels. You lose a Scots pine, you lose a habitat for a squirrel. We need to take urgent action. We need to do more than sign a declaration. We need to make sure that the words are put into action and that every resident in Angus is urged to play their part, ensuring Angus remains a major source of biodiversity in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to make a comment? No. Okay, can we then go to the recommendations? We agree the two recommendations?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next one, number 13, is the possible exclusion of the public and the press. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we switch off the live feed, please?